Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the Cyanobacteria Shoreline Protection Program webinar. My name is Michelle Willows, and I am the Environmental Planner for the Lakehead Region Conservation Authority. And here with me today, I have
Jesse McFadden, Stewardship Manager and Biologist with the LRCA.
we are so excited to share about cyanobacteria and what we have planned for private landowners. But I'd like to ask you to please keep your questions to the end of the presentation because there will be lots of time for us to answer them then. So let's get started. What is cyanobacteria? Or perhaps you've heard of it as blue-green algae. They are microscopic plant-like organisms that are naturally found within streams, rivers, and lakes. The organisms thrive in warm, nutrient-rich environments, especially those with slow moving currents and minimal disturbance from waves or wind. Blooms occur when the populations rise rapidly, especially if there is phosphorus or nitrogen loading, creating large, dense floating mats of algae that can be bluish and green in color, which is most common, or they can be brown or red and yellow in color. These blooms can create cyanotoxins, which can have a number of negative influences depending on the genus of cyanobacteria. Here are the most common genus of cyanobacteria that we have found in the Lakehead Watershed based on our experience in recent studies. So when these blooms occur, cyanobacteria can be produced, or cyanotoxins can be produced as a secondary metabolites during the growth phase, often creating large accumulations. So cyanotoxins can have these effects. So they're called dermatoxins, which can irritate skin and cause rash or redness. Neurotoxins, which can affect the nervous system, and hepatotoxins, which are primarily affect the liver, but can also impact other organisms. So not only do they cause these unwanted health effects to either your pets, yourself, your friends, your family, the cyanobacteria blooms can also look gross, contributing to a loss of aesthetic appeal or a reduction in property value if the body of water is known to be prone to cyanobacteria. It can also result in reduced recreational opportunities. You can still like go boating and kayaking and such, but direct contact with the water is not recommended. Lastly, cyanobacteria can also reduce oxygen levels and can have a negative impact on aquatic species within the lake. It's also advised not to consume fish from the location where cyanobacteria advisories are in effect. So the top four photos are things that cyanobacteria is often confused with. It can be tricky to ID sometimes. So my suggestion is if you don't know what you're looking at, do the stick test. Find a nearby stick, swipe it through the water, and if you have watermeal or duckweed or filamentous green algae, it will actually stick to the stick. You'll be able to physically see it on the stick, whereas cyanobacteria will not do that. The trickier portion of this comes between when you're trying to tell cyanobacteria and pollen apart. So pollen often floats and is yellow in color, or cyanobacteria, again, it's that more that greeny blue paint appearance, and it is often found throughout the water column. But the two can occur at the same time. If you suspect an algae bloom, please report it. The first step is to document the date and time and location of your suspected algae bloom. Make sure you take pictures, take close-up photos, take broad view photos, try to capture the extent of the bloom. And it's also really, really beneficial if you take some notes. So what's the air temperature? What's the water temperature? Is there wind, waves, any other observations? Perhaps geese? I know that they tend to cause algae blooms at our own properties. So those are all important factors. And then steer clear and warn your family and friends of the cyanobacteria bloom and discourage swimming or playing in the water that day. Step 5 is to actually record it to the Spills Action Center. So you can report it by phone if that's your preference, or you can report it online and submit your photos. It's really important that you do this so that they can actually come and test it. But it can be tricky if you're really far away from the city and or it's the weekend, or perhaps MECP doesn't have any representatives that can come out to site. They may ask you to take a sample if you feel safe to do so. Believe it or not, the samples are quite large. They're 1 liter in size. So if you get a sample, try to get a large amount and refrigerate the samples till you can hand them off to a representative from the Ministry of Environment and Conservation and Parks. These Samples are then taken to their lab, and any results from that test will be posted on the Thunder Bay District Health Unit's website. Here's some great examples of cyanobacteria blooms that were actually at One Island Lake when we were visiting. Often windswept and along the shoreline, but still something to be watchful of and have a bit of concern about. Here's a really great example about how cyanobacteria and pollen can be a bit tricky to tell apart, or they're there at the same time. You'll see the yellow hues on top, but you really see that green undertone underneath and throughout the water column. So that's kind of where I would consider that a bloom when looking at it. It's also kind of tricky to say what constitutes a bloom. So if you're seeing these windswept and like high particulates in the water, that's often indicative of a cyanobacteria bloom. They kind of create these groovy patterns on the water, and it could get worse throughout the day. So it's good to be mindful of what you're boating in or swimming in. And then this is the absolute worst case scenario. So this was a bloom that I encountered where it was thick, paint-like, and throughout the entire river system. I was actually on a boat tour, and all I could do was focus on the water and take pictures of how bad the cyanobacteria is. And this is a great means for like never wanting this on your waterfront shoreline. So there have been 35 confirmed cyanobacteria blooms reported in the last 5 years within the Lakehead Watershed. And that number only reflects those that were actually reported and sampled. There are so many more that go undocumented each year. And that's why reporting blooms is so important. Public reports help us respond quickly, investigate the problem, track trends over time, and better understand where and when blooms are occurring. This information supports our water quality program, public awareness, and future prevention efforts. So, who would we be if we didn't practice what we preach? In 2022, the LRCA began the Cyanobacteria Monitoring Program to better understand the presence of cyanobacteria at 4 conservation areas to protect our visitors and wildlife. The project encompassed 2 methods for testing and identifying cyanobacteria. So we use Eurofins algae toxin test strips. They're kind of like what you'd use in your pool if you're trying to determine the different chemical balance. And we also do micrology work with Blue-Green Labs. Given the increase in public reports of hazardous algae blooms, the project provides a step forward in monitoring and raising public awareness of cyanobacteria throughout the Lakehead watershed. So here are our 4 areas that we study. So Herca Cove, Silver Harbor, Mission Island Marsh, and Hazelwood Lake. So the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks is mostly interested in the cyanobacteria blooms that are occurring in Lake Superior and along the North Shore. But it's really important to remember that the greater watershed has an influence on these cyanobacteria blooms within Lake Superior. Thus, we actually really do focus on Hazelwood Lake, and that is our ground zero for cyanobacteria blooms on our own properties. So we've looped it into our study as well, and it's been really interesting to see the trends over the last 4 years or so. So say hello to us if you see us out in the field. Our team collects water samples every Monday and Tuesday, typically during the morning. Once collected, the samples are delivered to Blue-Green Labs for analysis, where PhD candidate Nathan Wilson identifies the primary, secondary, and tertiary genera of the phytoplankton communities and determine whether cyanobacteria are present in high abundance or quantities. Each year, we compile these results into a water quality report that highlights the key findings, long-term trends, and photos of what was observed throughout the season. So a few things I just really want to remind you of and I want you to take home with you today is when in doubt, keep out. If you've observed cyanobacteria, stay out of the water. Try not to go and recreate in it, even if it's a hot, beautiful day. Don't drink the water that is suspected of cyanobacteria contamination. A big misconception is that you can actually boil it out. Boil advisories do not work for removing cyanotoxins. Avoid swimming or bathing, especially if there's that large surface scum or foam or large dense mats of algae. Refrain from eating the fish, as I previously mentioned. Again, cyanobacteria toxins are not inactivated by cooking the fish, so they suggest you avoid consumption. And maybe it's just such a hot, beautiful day that you're like, I'm throwing caution to the wind, I'm getting in the water. Please rinse off immediately with fresh water and monitor your symptoms. I know that once a cyanobacteria bloom has been confirmed, they suggest that you stay out of the water for up to 14 days to make sure that you steer clear of cyanotoxins. And there are some other things that you can do to prevent cyanobacteria along your shoreline. So use phosphate-free detergents and personal care and household cleaning products. One thing I've really noticed since we started this project is that gray water from saunas seems to be one of those additives of those nitrates and phosphorus. So if you can get personal care supplies from like places like Lovely Body, they're perfect for your saunas, especially if they're close to the water. Reduce or avoid fertilizers on lawns. Use phosphate-free fertilizers only. Prevent livestock or pet waste from entering water systems that cause excessive nutrients and bacteria. You can always use landscape strategies such as rain gardens or like you can use fountains and aerators, but that's not always the most practical strategy, but try to avoid that perfectly manicured lawn. And consider looking into your septic tank condition. Another thing that was really highlighted to me in our research and with community efforts is that people often inherit a camp and they don't know the condition of the septic tank. They don't know how old it is. They don't know if it's been cracked or how it's been maintained. And that is a large contributing factor a lot along these inland lakes. So unfortunately, I'm not a septic tank expert, but we do have fact sheets that I'm happy to share. But if you want to get more information, you can always contact the Thunder Bay District Health Unit and inquire about the condition of your septic tank and get some background information. But most importantly, what we're here to talk about today is maintaining that buffer strip of native vegetation along your lake or riverfront property. So I'm going to hand it off to Jessie McFadden to talk about our shoreline protection program.
Thanks, Michelle. So, how does maintaining a buffer of vegetation between lake and lawn help reduce cyanobacteria blooms? Um, Native perennials have really extensive root systems that can be anywhere as deep as 5 to 15 feet into the ground, as opposed to turf grass or typical lawns, which only has about 1 to 2 inches of rooting system below ground. So we consider mowed lawns to act the same way as a paved surface would when we think about stormwater runoff or water flowing over land during rain events. So we really want those native trees, shrubs, and perennials to intercept the runoff, absorb that runoff by the deep roots, and then let those deep roots filter out some of those contaminants before it gets into our water systems. Native plants do this, a vegetative buffer does this, all while offering nearshore shade, which helps regulate water temperature, and while reducing harmful chemicals, road salts, etc., from entering our waterways. So the photos on the top half of the screen are showing a healthy example of shoreline buffers, whereas the photos on the bottom of the screen are the types of shorelines that create conditions ripe for a cyanobacteria bloom. So a good rule of thumb we like to say is to clear no more than 25% of your lake or river frontage and to leave a strip of natural vegetation 10 meters deep, ideally, along your shoreline, aiming for 1 shrub every square meter. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you can achieve this. First, a couple examples. I'd love to promise you all that restoring your shoreline, naturalizing your shoreline can be done in an aesthetically pleasing way, and you can still maintain your view and access to the lake, all while improving water quality at your camp or lakeshore property. So here we're looking at Mission Island Marsh Conservation Area, where the shoreline was experiencing significant erosion. By regrading the slope to a gradual 3-to-1 incline, using river rock, and then adding native shrubs and perennials back into the mowed lawn, the shoreline now offers habitat for species at risk, nature enjoyment for park users, and water filtration from runoff that's trickling down from the nearby parking lot. So you can see in the bottom right just kind of what it looks like now. We've still maintained access to the lake for those who use the water there through paths on either side and through the center of the plantings, while creating some sort of garden-like shoreline restoration looking features. Another example we've got underway is at Hazelwood Lake, where Michelle mentioned we have been observing increasing blue-green algae blooms over the past 4 or 5 years. And so, this site as well, it's a beach that hosts a lot of families and folks recreating throughout the summer months. But at LRCA, we love to practice what we preach, and so we're naturalizing about half of the shoreline while still maintaining that lake access that everyone loves. So we kicked this project off the ground in 2025, and with the help of volunteers, we planted over 1,000 native plants to naturalize sort of a lower area, depressed area of the shoreline. And we're excited to see how these establish at the site over the next few years and help them along. On the top right photo, you are looking at a bloom from last summer, and then later on in the year on the bottom right is that naturalized area. Again, there's a few different ways to do this, and at Hazelwood Lake, we actually combined just some natural regeneration. There's no invasive species out at Hazelwood Lake, so we can let plants naturally come back on their own, and then we augmented that area with plantings as well. So hopefully I've sold you on the concept now, and you are ready to revegetate your shoreline as well. If that's the case, LRCA can help. We're excited to help. We've got a program that offers free native plants, personalized shoreline consultation, and planting plans and planting support available for you. So over the past 5 years, we're pleased to share that we've helped over 55 landowners to restore shoreline or riparian area on their property with funding from the Ministry of Natural Resources and from Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. And this year, we're happy to announce that the program is back, and we've got 2 separate streams. So there's an option to access free native plants and professional restoration support for those that are experiencing blue-green algae concerns, as we're talking about today. Or if maybe you haven't seen a blue-green algae bloom on your shoreline yet, but you may be concerned. If your property falls within the Thunder Bay area of concern, we've got an avenue for you to access free plants and that restoration support as well. So this means we'll have the capacity to work with 20 eligible landowners this season. Really excited about that. Participants will receive a site visit from LRCA staff to assess their shoreline, individualized planting plans, and up to 100 native plants to restore the shoreline on your property. On the screen here is just a screen grab from our website, and we'll link you to it as we continue on through the presentation. Here are a couple examples of the planting plans that you'll receive. Customized, of course, to your site, and it's got the plant species listed out and photos of each of the species on the reverse side of the handout so that you can reference them as you are sort of planning out your planting efforts and restoring your shoreline. And then here, just to share some happy smiling Shoreline Protection Program participants from past years, all looking pleased with their shoreline restoration efforts. So you can see that a little can go a long way. A lot of the plants that we're working with are in 1-gallon containers, but with some tender loving care over the first few years of establishment, watering during drought, and maintenance, these shorelines will fill in and be really good at capturing some of that runoff and filtering it before it enters the lake. So there's a couple steps we do ask that you do in order to apply. I'll start off just by saying that all of the details are listed on our website, www.lakeheadca.com, and you can access the site by taking a photo of the square on the screen here now. We are also happy to receive email inquiries anytime at stewardship@lakeheadca.com, and that email address is just on the next slide. So to walk you through the application process, we ask that any interested participants do tune into this webinar. So if you're here today, well done, or at least listen to a recording of it that we'll be sharing online. And then by May 11th, we're hoping to have application forms submitted to us so that we can go through all the applications and start setting up those site visits throughout the months of May and June. So the application form, again, it's downloaded from our website. If you send us an email, we'll be happy to send it your way. It is a fillable PDF, and really we're just looking for a couple simple details about where your property is located, what water quality concerns you may have at your site, or maybe it's erosion you're dealing with. And then ideally, we'd love to see a couple photos of your shoreline included in that application as well. But it can be pretty simple. If you're having any problems with the application form download or in filling it out, we're happy to just receive that information over email as well. So feel free to reach out by email or just give us a call and we'll walk you through that task. So again, once we've had a chance to review those applications, we'll set up a site visit sometime during the month of May or June. And from that site visit, we'll ideally talk with you a little bit about your aspirations for your shoreline, take some measurements, see what type of soil you have, what other species may already be growing, and then from there develop a planting plan that you can reference and allocate plants to your shoreline that you can pick up from the LRCA Administrative Office at 130 Conservation Road on June 26, 2026, and another couple months. So yeah, some key dates here in red. The last step of the program is just to let you know, of course, that landowners, so you would be responsible for installing and maintaining the plantings throughout the coming months and years. So that's just keeping in mind protecting from any wildlife, deer, if needed, watering during dry spells throughout the summer. But we're always happy to follow up with some substitution plants if needed, or check in along the way to help you get those plants healthy and established in those first couple of years. So again, this is just link to the application form. We will be reviewing applications on a first come, first served basis. So the sooner you get your application in, the better. And like I said, any questions, just pick up the phone, give us a call, or send us an email to stewardship@lakeheadca.com. For anyone that's perhaps not quite qualified for or eligible for the Shoreline Protection Program, or who is perhaps not able to grab a spot in the Shoreline Protection Program this year, we do have a few other ways to get your hands on quality native plants through LRCA this year. So I just wanted to mention that the tree seedling program is currently open for sales, with sales closing next Wednesday, May 6th. We do still have black spruce, white spruce, and jack pine tree seedlings available through that program. You can get 25 tree seedlings, 1-year-old tree seedlings, for $12, which is an absolute steal. And this is a great way to start bolstering your shoreline with great, eventually large trees offering shade with extensive rooting structures. We're happy to shout out as well Hills Greenhouse, who has donated all of these trees, which allows the sales of these tree seedlings to go directly towards our environmental education programming. And then another opportunity to get your hands on some native plants through LRCA is at our spring native plant sale, which will be held on Friday, June 12th from 11 to 7 p.m. at our administrative office. All of these plants are grown through our initiative called Seeds for Conservation, which sustainably harvests seeds native to Northern Ontario from our conservation areas. So all of the plants are true natives. They're suitable to a variety of different sites. We've got some moisture-loving species, some sun-loving species, and we're excited to share them with you. So another way to get your hands on some great plants, mark your calendars for June 12th, 2026. So with that, we will open it up to you all for any questions you may have. Feel free to unmute yourselves and or you can drop your question in the chat. And we're happy to continue this conversation. Thank you so much for joining.